Hello everyone, my name is Shivam Dubey. This is the time probably many of us would be witnessing first time in their lifetime. Yes, I'm talking about the pandemic spread across the globe. Yes, it's about coronavirus. So today going to be discussing some potential impacts of this COVID-19 virus on the economy. It will first I'll try to have a look on the global economic side, then primarily to the Indian economy. Then I'll try to give some ways forwards to how to deal with this situation, some of the policies that the current central banks or the government can take. So moving forward, something about me. I'm a PGP student of 1921 batch in IM Trichy. Let's move forward. So the impact on global economy. Starting with, I like to have a brief discussion on the numbers of real GDP growth rates. I'll be trying to compare last 3 years data of top countries like US, China, Japan. As we can see, there's already a decline in the real GDP percentage when it comes to 2018 2019. For its US, the growth rate was declined to 2.3 compared to 2.9. So similarly for China, Germany, France as well. India also has a huge dip from 6.7 to 5.3 when it compares to 2018 and 2019. So COVID-19 is a unique because it can give both supply and demand shocks. Secondly, the global economy was already in a precarious state in 2019. The risk of global recession was already been thought of, and this shutdown of economic activities can be a great disaster. Next, uh, it can give the severe damage to the demand shock, that because the people are not allowed to move because of this lockdown and quarantine. People are not allowed to move. The demand have gone down. Alongside, the production is also curtailed. Many firms will not have necessary inputs. So uh, I'll next I'll try to have the to discuss some of the impacts of social distancing. That's the primary measure taken by many of the countries to at least have a short-term resolution so that we can uh, keep away the affected people away from the normal people. So this graph actually talks about year-on-year change in total restaurant diners. Why this data has been taken? Because restaurants can be a useful proxy for person-to-person retail activities. Retail activity is something where consumers are directly involved. So this can give us a fair bit of an idea. Global restaurant diners have were down to 89% as on 18th of March itself, and it's predicted it will go down even more. Many restaurants already operating on very thin margin will be forced to lay off, and there can be shutdowns of the outlets as well. We can see countries like US, UK, Canada have already seen a huge decline as on 18th of March. That is reduction by 80%, and it's expected to go more down. So nextly, I'll try to have a brief on how the growth rate can be. These are basic components that actually drives the GDP. That is consumption, investments, government expenditures, exports, etc. We can see when we compare 2019 to 2020, it's a forecasted image as predicted by various forecasting agencies. This data comes from a report that was recently published by KPMG. It says that there can be a growth rate instead of a sharp rise. There can be a decline to 4.3% overall in the growth rate. So where the consumption is something that is being affected the most, since people are asked to because of the demand and the supply shock, since people are asked to not to move away from the places. The impact on the US economy is likely to be high due to lower consumption, weaker business investments, and lower inventory accumulation rising from combined supply and demand shocks. Moving ahead, now let's discuss some impacts on the Indian economy. So here's a quick overview about the Indian economy before this pandemic. We have been seeing from last 5 years there have been a steady increase in the real GDP growth rate in 2015 and 16, but after 18 and 19 there can be a steep decline when when it comes to real GDP. So already we were Indian economy was also going from the same phase as the global economy was. It was decelerating in the last 4 to 5 quarters, and this outbreak of COVID-19 posed some new challenges. So some of the immediate steps taken by government was as of now is 21 days lockdown, that where only the essential commodities are allowed to be sold, that too in a very fixed time period. Many of the industries are currently shut down completely so that there is no production as well. While Indian business, barring a few sectors, can possibly insulate themselves from global supply chain disruption caused by the outbreak due to relative lower reliance on the immediate imports, their exports to COVID-19 affected nation could also take a hit. So, when it comes to India, the three major contributors to GDP were the private consumptions, investments, and the external trade. Just from the numbers point of view, this consumption of for Indian GDP accounted to be 60%. That is huge for a country like in India. Let's move forward. So, based on the current situation, there can be three possible scenarios that a country like India can witness. Scenario one: a quick retraction across the globe, including India, by the end of April or by mid-May. We can experience just as China has already uh, almost overcame this situation and came to normalcy. Normalcy. Other nations are also largely contain the spread of COVID-19 pandemic, and large fiscal and monetary stimulus and will start to work sooner than expected. So if this happens, the lockdown can be removed by April end or mid-May, and India's growth rate can again uh, go back to the normal pace by the end of 2020, financial year 2020, that is maybe 5.3 to 5.7%. Second scenario, while India is able to control this COVID-19, but there's still a significant global recession because of other countries. Even under this scenario, the impact on Indian growth in terms of global spillovers will be meaningful because India is also involved in various trade activities with other countries. So India's growth rate will be lower compared to the scenario one, but yes, then also it can go for a steady rate of around about 4 to 4.5%. Scenario 3: COVID-19 actually proliferates within India and lockdown gets extended. That is something, maybe we have a long lockdowns, maybe for more than 3 to 4 months. This could be a uh, problem because the internal domestic production as well as the exports both will be affected, and we can see the Indian growth rate may fall below 3% of the in this scenario. That is something the other countries are already started facing it. Moving ahead, uh, two things primarily drive the economy. That's first is the demand side, and second is the supply side. I'll try to discuss something about the demand side. Okay, so as we know, the GDP is the primary factors that drives the GDP is consumption, investment, the government interventions, and the net exports and imports. So, what this lockdown has can give impact on the demand sides. We have listed the consumption part because that is the significant, as discussed in the earlier slides. It contributes 60% of the Indian GDP. These are the numbers when it comes to consumption. The food food and non-alcoholic beverages accounts the major share, that is around about 26 to 27%, whereas transport becomes the second highest, that is around about 17.6%, followed by housing, water, and others. So we can see because of this abrupt stop and the lockdown that the government has taken, the transport sector, recreation and the culture sector, as well as restaurants and hotels, this can be something that can see a sharp decline. Abrupt stop of urban activities could lead to a steep fall in consumption of non-essential goods because only essential goods in the lockdowns are allowed to be consumed or transported. The impact would be even more severe if the domestic supply chain disruption caused by 21 days lockdown will affect the availability. Moving ahead, the supply side impact on Indian economy. So this is a basic these are some numbers where India is actually involved in exports. So when it comes to exports, India is primarily uh, is an exporter of raw materials to many countries, whereas it imports some of the finished goods or intermediate goods from other nations. When it comes to raw materials export, China is one of the major importers from India. It accounts 13.7% of our imports. So shutdown of factories and the resultant delay in supply of goods could result in a shortage of raw materials in China for companies largely importing from there. So if uh, there is a shortage of raw materials to the manufacturing hub of China, so automatically the intermediate goods and the finished goods can also take a hit, because we when it comes to China, uh, we are highly dependent on these 4 to 5 sectors, that is electrical machineries, nuclear reactors, organic chemicals, plastics, and fertilizers. These numbers, on the graph shown by in the blue color is something that is imports primarily from China. But I'll try to sum up in a overall manner. While the disruption in output in China could impact some Indian industries, definitely the economy could relatively be insulated, because given its low reliance on the intermediary goods from China as well as the common practices in India in terms of stockpiling inventories. Indians generally have this tendency when it comes to trade. They stockpile inventories a lot. So this inventory can actually help in uh, can actually uh, is actually enough for countries like India to fulfill the demand for to a certain extent, unlike countries like US, because there they don't follow this model. They don't pile up inventory because of the traders' mindset of inventory to reduce the inventory cost. So as we see about the demand and the supply sides, so major concern would be the demand side, that I think would be a problem for India. Headwinds are more likely to account on the demand side rather than supply shocks in countries affected by COVID-19, especially to India. Moving ahead, as we already discussed, there are various factors that can actually lead to the impact in the global economies. What are some of the measures that possibly we can take to tackle this situation? So I'll like to just summarize. There are two bodies that actually comes into picture when controlling this economic problems or issues. First is the government, the government or the parliament in India in this case. The policies that they control are the physical policies. Secondary, the central banks, they primarily take care of the monetary policies. Fiscal policies are generally when the government try to push some money by some various government interventions, try to build various things so that the consumption can be increased. Apart from that, they can the tax reduction can be done so that there's a the norm population have some money to spend, so that the money can be there in the market. Whereas the monetary policies primarily talks about the central bank. In our case, it's the Reserve Bank of India, who can try to work with the interest rates so that the private investments can be boosted. They even help us in boosting the economy by uh, buying various assets or something, so that the money can be flowed. We'll be looking in all some of the policies that they can take, so that we can at least come out of this scenario. So initially we'll be talking about monetary policies. That is something that is taken by the central banks. In our case, it's RBI. For US, it's the Fed. So a step can be taken by the central banks across globe is reduce the interest rates. Reducing the interest rate, that is, the central bank will be lending to the commercial banks at a very lower rates. Simultaneously, the commercial banks would be lending to the investors at a very low rate. This will actually boost the investments, the I factor for the GDP, and people will the small factories or the industries can take loans. They can rescue themselves from the shutdowns. They can give wages parallelly that can actually build up in consumption as well. So this can be a possible way to tackle this. Already countries like UK and US have already reduced the repo rates to an extent. US have come down from 2.5% to mere 0.25%, whereas UK has taken a dip from uh, have taken a dip from zero point 0.7 to 0. Whereas the eurozones, the countries in Europe apart from UK, they have reduced their repo rate in to minus zero point 0.5. So these are some of the factors that at least the central bank can take so that the investment can be boosted up. Next, second can be the intervene in the financial market. Central bank can put a lot of money in the financial market so as to boost the economy in short terms, make it easier for bank to lend money. Some of the policies that can be made by the central bank so that the money is easily accessible to the investors, so that they can again help in boosting up their private investments. That will help in boosting up their private investments. The countries can the investors can actually run down their already factories or industries because of that already got a hit because of this pandemic. Some policies like CRR ratio can be relaxed a bit, or some other policies, so which actually becomes a hurdle for investors to take money from the market, that can be relaxed. Another possible thing that central banks can actually do is buy assets. Government and corporate bond can be bought by the central banks. Government government securities like treasury bonds, uh, government bonds can be bought up by the central bank so that the money can be infused to the market. The borrowing cost for the government should be made so lower that it can borrow as much as it requires, and even so that it can help the domestic uh, manufacturing industries, factories, so that they can actually invest and at least uh, get rid of this shutdown. Next, we'll try to discuss physical policies that actually the government can take to come out of this pandemic. So something that can be done from the government in is initially subsidizing of wages. Yes, that can be a boost for the small manufacturing industry so that they don't shut down. People currently, the employees, they will be very it will be very tough for industries and the factories to pay for their employees because of low production and slowdown in economy. Yes, government can actually try to push money and give some subsidize the wages. Also, in the long term, they can actually lower down the tax rate so that it's not a burden for them. But all these things will actually will increase a burden to the government itself. As we know from 2008 recession, also many of the countries have not been able to move out of. So this will automatically increase the government debt. That is something uh, over that can only help us in, because these policies can help us in short term shocks, but over a long term it will increase the government debts. Many of the countries are in huge debts after 2008 recession. So the ultimate aim, I guess, the monetary policies will actually help us in moving ahead. The buying of assets, government assets, bonds, so that the money can be infused in market, that is a possible way out. Thank you for listening.